Good evening, sir, and I'd like to take this moment to actually thank you for giving us an opportunity to interview you. And I, now I'm gonna formally talk about the project to you, like what it's basically about. As Jazil had mentioned earlier, it's about the 3 R's to reuse, reduce, and recycle. Now, our project basically concerned about the various initiatives that certain individuals had undertaken, like, for example, Miss Greta Thunberg, who had voiced her opinion in the UN about the existential crisis of climate change that would be hitting us in a few decades or so, and also the certain initiatives like the all governments has are undertaking all over the world. We had certain queries and certain questions in our mind that we thought we could, express to a certain experienced individual like yourself, obviously. And so, if you're ready, we can formally start with the questions. Each will be taking turns. So, let's start.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. I think it's a very good topic, and thank you for having me. With you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir. Myself, Godfrey here, sir. I'll be asking the first question. So,
Hmm.
sir, now our topic, as we said, reduce, reuse, and recycle. Now, my question is that how are they incorporated in the restoration programs after a disaster, sir? And how effectively is it done?
Thank you. Almost all disasters create massive amount of waste material. I was in Japan after the 2011 tsunami, and I went to one town. The town name was Ishinomaki, and they had 3 waves of the tsunami coming, and I think it came within half an hour. And within half an hour, it produced an equivalent of 105 years of the solid waste which they normally produce. 105 years of solid waste. In other towns, it ranges from 10 to 50 years. So the massive amount of waste being produced, because when a tsunami hits a coast, everything tend to waste. The building becomes waste. The carpet becomes a waste. The freezer in the supermarket become waste. The meat in the supermarket become waste, and so on. And if you take an earthquake, the same. If you take a flood, it's the same. So there is this problem of massive waste creation in every country. The same actually happens for conflicts as well. If you are bombing in a town, for example, in Iraq during the ISIS invasion, in Syria now, there is a lot of waste being created. And we actually have a full service line which we offer to the countries after disasters. And this is about disaster waste management. We have a guidance. If you have not seen it, actually, I can send it to you. And there, what we do is that we do a very rapid assessment of the amount of waste being generated. Then we help those countries how to recover and recycle most of it.
Sir, if a country has strict rules and policies for its citizen to follow the basic reduce, reuse, recycle, do you think it will be effective in combating or preventing future environmental disasters, or at least to some extent?
There is certainly no doubt that if the country has a law, but having a law is not enough. It has to be enforced as well. That law has to be properly enforced. If the law is properly enforced, then what happens is that people start to see the consequence of that. So even while that will even change their consumption patterns, for example. So instead of you start to go to the shop with a bag instead of taking so much of plastic from there. Now and the law can be enforced in 2 ways. One is that the government put a fine on not behaving right. You have the rule, you don't follow it, so you have a fine, and then people follow. The other way is that socially enforced. So some behavior, for example, in Geneva, when I go to the shop and sometime I forget to carry my bag and I take a plastic, I buy a plastic bag and I have to pay a very nominal price, but I still feel very guilty when I walk out because people will actually be looking at you like, yeah, as if you are not doing the right thing. Whereas you won't, feel the same thing in another country. So, having the law, yes, having it properly enforced and having socially enforced is the most important thing. And yes, if you do that, it will certainly have major positive impact. I will say one more thing. In Europe, we have a big culture of recycle. So every Thursday, we are allowed to put anything which we don't want in the house outside our house. Not outside our apartment block. So there's a space. So you have an old chair, an old computer, old anything, old dress, whatever. And on every Thursday, you will see people, including people like me, going for a walk for a kilometer or two, looking at what people have thrown out, and you might find something which is very useful for you, a toy for a child. Okay, you bring it home, and it's not considered, in a way it is scavenging, isn't it? But it's not considered scavenging. That terminology is not used. You are going and picking up. So I had my colleague, working for the UN. She was pregnant, and she, was from, I think, one of the Nordic countries, and she told me that everything she needed for the child, she accumulated from picking up from the curb over the last, 6 months. The prams, the cradle, the early toys, and so on, and it is considered completely, genuine, appropriate behavior. Whereas you cannot imagine that happening in India or Middle East. That will be considered as to for the child. No, it will not. So yes, so that will change. So that will change behavior.
That was actually surprising to know, and thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
So, what do you think is the government's view on using recycled materials for construction purposes in disaster-prone areas?
Okay, now this is very easy. The governments, mostly absolutely welcome it because the government, want the material to be used because that otherwise you have a cost of disposing it as well, and the government is always in need of resources. So the government is always supportive. In every country I have seen, the government always is for maximizing of recycling. Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So if that's the case, then how will it affect the restoration process?
Again, it really depends on the scale of the disaster and in which country it happens. For example, it's a very localized disaster in an affluent country. Then, of course, it's much easier for them to move all the waste out and then start to rebuild it. But if it's in a country which is not that affluent, mostly things will be done by recycling. For example, in Nepal, after the earthquake, much before the government started any reconstruction, people just used the material available to them from their damaged buildings, and then they rebuilt their country.
Sir, Kaushik here. I'll be asking the next question.
Yes.
So in recent times, we have seen all these, natural disasters, like in the one that happened in Assam, the Kerala floods, and plus the melting of ice caps, most of which can be attributed towards climate change. So in your opinion, how can the average person, like the students or any general average person, contribute towards preventing climate change?
We need at 3 levels action. Number one, we can try to reduce our personal carbon footprint. So this is something which you should actually find out what is your personal carbon footprint. There are many carbon footprint calculators. You look at that and see if there's anything which you can do. For example, if you were going by car to your school, but if you use the bus, that reduces the carbon footprint. If you're flying business class home, or you fly economy, I'm just saying in your particular context, if you're living in a village in India, I would have given a very different answer. But the bottom line is that you have to look at your personal carbon footprint and then try to see what you can change. Then you see what is the next sphere of influence you have, which is your family. And to some degree, your school. So you can look at your family's carbon footprint and see how you could reduce it. And that happens at two levels. One is, construction, procurement, all those things. And the other one is a consumption, day to day, what you are doing. In your house, what you consume. Can you consume some things local? The vegetable you procure, can it be local? For example, let's say in your houses there may be, mineral water bottles which you are buying. Now you could buy one, coming from half the way around the world, from Fiji or France, or you could be buying something, coming from local. So there are ways in which you can look at this. You can look at your energy bills and see if there is a energy saving material which you can use at your house. Is there a possibility to put a solar panel in your house? There are all these possibilities. The same about school as well.
So you have worked with companies like Shell as an environmental advisor and you have responded for various oil spills as well. And then we also know that some of these corporations and industries are often the adversaries for climate change. They're the reasons for it. And what are the how are they held accountable for these problems that they cause? What are the what are the ramifications that they face?
I think the companies understand themselves that the future is carbon neutral, and they migrate as well. So companies like Shell or the big oil companies now no longer see themselves as oil companies. They used to call themselves as oil companies, and now they see more as energy companies. So they invest a lot more, certainly on gas, and increasingly, I think already 10 years back, Shell was investing $500 million on renewables, and they will migrate into this. Big companies are ultimately responding to a market need for certain goods and services. So when the demand shifts, they would also shift. So it's also a lot left to the national policies to steer them away from whatever is the business they are in. Because if solar panel is what everyone wants, solar panel is what the market will create. And big oil would either shift into solar panel or they'll fold their business. Because they cannot sell something to people who do not want it. So when everyone is going to use electric cars, very soon, maybe I think some countries are decided to phase out petrol and diesel car by 2030. Of course, then companies will move into electric cars production and close the production of the fossil fuel gas. So yeah, ultimately, the science will lead the way, okay, and then follow the public pressure, followed by government policy, and then things will change. Thank you.
Okay, sir. So with that, we've come to the end of the interview.
Okay. Very good.
And I like to, extend my gratitude on behalf of our school, my teammates, and I for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us today, for giving us such a wonderful interview. And yeah, and we're so inspired by your work in the UN and all your articles. And yeah, we just want to see you, make a difference. And we pray to God, that in the future our paths cross once again, and, to meet face to face once, beyond this COVID situation. And yeah, thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All the best. And maybe we'll cross our paths in the corridor of the United Nations. Thank you.